A political and identity crisis keeps Georgia on my mind. Many wonder, both inside and outside the former Soviet republic, what the next chapter holds for the country's 3.7 million people. Moments before Parliament voted through a divisive foreign agent law, a brawl broke out between the ruling Georgia Dream Party and pro-Western opposition. Outside, protesters tried to storm the building. The law requires NGOs and independent media that receive more than 20% of their funding from foreign donors to register as organizations serving the interests of a foreign power. In recent weeks, it sparked some of the biggest protests the country has ever seen. Opponents say that the legislation was modeled after similar laws in Russia that the Kremlin has used to increasingly snuff out opposition and civil society. Sky News has more on what the demonstrators fear for their country.
They believe their dream, Georgia joining the European Union, is threatened by an increasingly authoritarian government beholden to Moscow.
The ruling Georgian Dream Party denies leaning toward Russia, but there are allegations that behind the scenes, its founder and former Prime Minister Bidzina Ivanishvili pulls the strings and is willing to do whatever it takes to remain in power. BBC said state media officials have regularly misled the public.
But there's deep polarization and also a lot of disinformation that has been coming from the government too, through their pro-government channels.
Throughout it all, opposition figures, journalists, and academics faced intimidation or worse. Britain's Channel 4 News reported that people who would be forced to register as foreign agents had their homes targeted by gangs of masked men. Take a listen.
Investigative journalists like Nina Zuriashvili featured in wanted-style posters, calling her a traitor and foreign agent, plastered around the neighborhood where she lives and works. In other cases, it wasn't just balaclavas and paintbrushes, it was baseball bats.
Gosh.
And how many men attacked you?
At least 2 or 3, at least.
Professor Gia Japorisa is an academic who runs a think tank critical of the government and the new law.
Our guests this week, 3 journalists who would have to register as foreign agents from the media outlet Project 64. We have its founder, George Gogua, and its editor-in-chief, Margarita Antidze. Hello to you. Also joining us from OC Media is Mariam Nikuradze. She is the co-founder and co-director of the online platform OC Media. Margarita, I want to begin with you. Journalists are part of the story here. Maybe let's start by explaining to our viewers why independent media rely on foreign money.
Hello. Well, why? You know that many international funds have funding for media development in countries like Georgia. And Project 64 is one of the media outlets in our country, which is funded by one of such international funds. In our case, it's EED, European Endowment for Democracy. And that's why we, as well as many other media outlets in our countries, will be labeled as foreign agents according to this law. Why? Why is that? Because the government is trying to silence critical voices in media as well as in NGOs. Because they are, they are trying to win election in October 2024. And we are those who are doing critical stories about this government, about situation in Georgia, and trying to message, the situation in Georgia to the international audiences. That's it.
Yeah, George, let me ask you real quick. We're in a waiting period. The bill now faces a likely veto by Georgia's president. The parliament can override that by holding a simple majority vote. But this law expected to be in place weeks before October's election. What does this mean for your outlet, for Project 64 and other independent journalists like you? Will you register?
Well, we're not. I mean, we pretty much agreed, all the independent media outlets and CSOs and NGOs, that there's no way we are registering, and the government, with this law, has a tool to, force the organizations to register themselves. But we are not doing that with our will. That's not a case. It's not only because, it basically means to obey to what we have been criticizing for a long time, and that we know that has happened in our neighboring countries, occupier countries, Russia, and it happened in Belarus, and it happened in other countries which are in the Russia's orbit. And I just want to go back to your previous question, why the independent media outlets are funded mostly by the foreign funds. This simple answer to that is that there is basically, it's not a big market for media in Georgia, and if you want to do a good journalism, is no other way, or you have to be dependent on political parties and get money from political parties, like we see in Georgian media, or from some shady businessmen who we don't know the intentions of. It's no way to be an independent, ethical, non-biased media outlet in Georgia, at least without a push from foreign funds.
Right. Let me bring
Of course, we
Mariam
would
into
like
the discussion. Sorry, George. Let me bring Mariam into this discussion. Mariam, we heard about the importance of independent journalism in this. Talk to us about what it's been like for you covering these protests, and have you or your team been harassed?
Yes, it is getting harder every day. For journalists, security was something that we still had a few years ago, but from 2021, when in one day more than 50 journalists have been attacked, and perpetrators were never punished. Since then, attacks on the journalists have been encouraged. But right now, we are targeted basically from the police officers themselves. When we are covering this protest, they neglect the fact that we are the journalists. They neglect the fact that we tell them that we are journalists. We wear press badges. We wear, this equipment and so on. But when we are documenting human rights violations at this protest, it triggers them. They get angry and they push us. Some of our colleagues have been beaten. They taken away equipment from some our other colleagues. And in addition to that, as you've seen in this report just recently, they've targeted critical media outlets and individual journalists with this campaign that they label as agents, and also most of us have been receiving these anonymous calls with threats, along with the civil society organization representatives, as well
Mariam,
as the participants of the protest.
Sorry to interrupt. Just curious about you and your team are rather young. What was the culture towards journalists in Georgia before this legislation came to be? Was there hostility towards journalists?
Hostility, as I mentioned, hostility towards the journalist it started from basically 2021, and it starts there, but it basically doubled since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine started, because that was when Georgian Dream government changed the foreign policy completely and started demonizing West, and doubling demonizing media together with the West, with the opposition, the donors, even attacking individual US and EU member country ambassadors and so on. So nowadays, I would say hostility is coming from the government, is encouraged from them. Their satellite TVs, their propaganda TV media. So in some cases, like today, we have a big celebration of church, the Family Purity Day that they call. And it was in such kind of demonstrations. Personally, I don't take a press badge. I go undercover because I feel like it is not safe, and police is not going to protect from the attacks from this radical conservative groups that are now in the streets.
Let me ask you a question, Margarita. when you look at the situation of what happened in Russia, it eventually ended up tightening the laws. Some of the pro-democracy groups had to leave the country. Some independent media were shut down there as well. Do you think that's where we're headed in Georgia?
Yeah, there is a chance, unfortunately, because as we see in Russia, the first foreign agents law had been adopted in this country in 2012. But then it had been transformed into what they've got in 2022 after numerous of amendments and changes. And right now, literally any person can be labeled as a foreign agent. And this is our fear in Georgia, that this law can be also transformed into what is working in Russia. And also, even this law, which had been adopted by the parliament just a few days ago, can be used as an instrument to silence critical, independent media in Georgia. Absolutely. There is a fear, and we do fear that that's what will happen in our country.
George, we're running out of time. Real quickly, very quickly, what does this say about Russian influence?
Well, it basically said that we are moving towards the Russian orbit, unfortunately. Whatever you call this law, whatever you call it, it's Russian, whatever, it's basically copying and pasting the Russian attitude towards freedom of speech, freedom of media, and freedom of expression.
We have to leave it there. I want to thank our guests, George, Margarita, Mariam. Thank you all. I wish we had more time to discuss this. Thank you for joining us from Tbilisi. That also brings us to the quote of the week. Writing for The Conversation, Professor Natasha Lindstad said, quote, "The spate of attacks on NGOs is a critical tool that authoritarian leaders use to expand their power. Though these laws are passed in defense of sovereignty, they represent a clear assault on democracy. As Russian influence continues to grow, these types of copycat laws are more likely to become the norm." That's it for this edition. Thank you for watching. More news coming up here on France 24.